Hey everybody, good Monday morning. It is the start of a new week. I've got my Monday morning coffee with my good old Blue Wave mug, and I actually also got a new cardigan and it feels like a hug. So today we're going to be talking about how I think it's really helpful and also important to think about language learning methods and techniques and resources and all these different things, to think of them as tools. They're tools in your language learner toolbox, and you should take that toolbox everywhere you go, and you should, think about how you can best use all these different tools in different situations, different scenarios. And one tool does not necessarily fit for every single job, every single need that you have, right? So quick sip of Monday morning coffee and we'll jump in, because this has been a topic that's come up a lot in the comments of my videos recently, and I'm really looking forward to telling you about it. So if you've been watching my videos for a long time, or if you've just seen lots of my content, you may have noticed that I have talked about a whole variety of ways that I like to study languages. So I did my very first live stream last Friday, and it was so much fun. Thank you everybody who came and made that really special for me. I've always been terrified that nobody will show up if I do a live stream, but it was so much fun. And in that video, I did a live demo of some different levels of shadowing in Japanese. And it was pretty cool because I pulled out an old Japanese podcast drama that I haven't listened to in years, and I was still able to live shadow at different levels with that resource because I studied it so deeply and intensively years ago. And so if you've seen a lot of my other videos, you may have noticed that I really like a lot of fairly intensive approaches to learning languages. And when I say intensive, I'm referring to things that involve, more laborious work. So, actually analyzing a piece of content, pulling it apart, mining it for value, and then potentially doing all kinds of things afterwards to really soak up as much as I can from each different resource. So for example, you may have seen me in the past talk about how sometimes I like to flashcard. I like to use Anki or Memrise or anything else. And that's one way that I have enjoyed at certain times consolidating knowledge, right? So learning all these different words and sentences, it's a nice way to sort of overlearn in a way and internalize these things so I can then use them in different ways. But more recently, you have seen me talk about my podcast interview method and how I like to use that as a way to accumulate sentences and grammatical patterns and structures and assimilate those and internalize them as part of my active repertoire in a language. Now, I've also been talking a lot about reading, and with that, not just intensive approaches, but extensive reading, right? And I even brought on Jared Turner from Mandarin Companion, which is a graded reader company that makes Chinese graded readers, because he is an enthusiast in, extensive reading, and I wanted to give you the best information I could about that particular method. And so when I did that, some people have been a bit confused, right? Because they think, well, on one hand, sometimes you're saying that you like to do things really, really intensively, and you like to do these things that are quite time consuming, but certainly, a really deep level of study. But then on the other hand, sometimes you're telling us about extensive approaches where you're not looking up every single word and where you're much more focused on covering lots of content. We talked all about the extensive reading approach, and I've also shared in videos since then that I also think there's a problem with perfectionism when it comes to finding comprehensible input. So the point here is that you've probably heard me, if you've been here for a while, talk about a whole variety of different methods. And some of the things that I like to do as a language learner are not necessarily the things that you often hear from perhaps online polyglots or different people. Generally speaking, I think most people tend to discourage some of the intensive stuff that I do, right? Like looking up all the different words, phrases, structures in a book and, studying those. But that's what I like to do. So the point of this video is to say that I really believe that all these different approaches, so let's take extensive reading versus what I call intensive reading, right? Those are two different tools and they give you different things and they're useful potentially at different times or just for different purposes, right? And so what I believe, and again, this is just me, I'm not saying everyone else is wrong or that someone else is, is doing it wrong, but personally, I think that if you say extensive reading is the only way forward, it's the best way to read, the only way you should be reading in a foreign language, and that's all you should do. And if people look down on intensive reading and say that's inferior, I think they're missing the point, right? Because in my opinion, extensive reading is fantastic for certain things. It's fantastic for building your fluency, for building automatic processing, which we learned about in that series with Jared. It's amazing for consolidating knowledge, and it's a great way to really see a lot of words in a lot of contexts. There's many things that extensive reading is good for. But what it doesn't do, for example, it doesn't give you that immense struggle that is actually very, very helpful. So some people who are sort of extensive reading purists, right? People who think that that's really the best and only way you should read if possible, they might describe that struggle you have with intensive reading as a bad thing, as being painful or anything like this. But the thing is that that's how it really is in the real world of language learning. So when you go out and you're in the wild and you're surrounded by native speakers who are all talking to each other, if you find yourself at a dinner party surrounded by, let's say, native German speakers who are all talking to each other and they're going to quickly, include you in a conversation, it's going to be hard, right? There has to be an element of struggle in your language learning. Reading novels is hard. Watching movies, it's pretty hard, right? So if you want to be able to function in that kind of real world environment, then I have found the struggle you get from transcribing a authentic podcast by yourself, struggling through it, right? And then getting a native speaker or an advanced speaker to help you fill in the gaps, help you fix all your mistakes. That struggle is incredibly instrumental. It's so helpful, right? And so a lot of the research studies that have been done around extensive reading, for example, well, their measure of success is often a test, like TOEFL, right? Well, people who did lots of extensive reading, they did really well on the test. And so it's the better method, right? There was a thing that Jared talked about with me. And again, Jared's fantastic. He shared so much great information. He talked about how there was a test that showed extensive reading for a certain amount of words or pages was equivalent to 1 year of studying abroad, which sounds like a massive claim. But the metric of success was a TOEFL test, I believe, right? They got the same score on a test. But to me, again, this is missing the point, right? Studying abroad for 1 year, living in a country for a year, being surrounded by people every day, and every day being a challenge, right? Of just communicating, of going about your day, buying groceries, getting a coffee, having a short interaction, maybe being in a class, like that gives you a lot more than what is going to come up on a paper, written test with no oral test on there as well, right? So the point I'm making here is just that I think they're both good. And I think that if someone says only do intensive reading, that's the better way, I also would not think that's correct, right? I think that these are both amazing ways to learn, and those are just tools in my toolbox. Shadowing is great, but it's just one tool in my language learner toolbox, right? So I think it's really helpful, personally, to take a holistic approach, right? To learn about all kinds of different ways to learn a language. That's why on this channel, I really try my best to show you everything I can. And then if there's a topic like extensive reading that I'm not a true expert in, right? I like doing extensive reading, but I want to bring people like Jared on the channel so that you can get the best information possible from people who really do, ascribe to those methods. But I think the most effective, most independent language learners are people who can develop a sense for what they enjoy, but also what they need at different times. So the absolute best language learning method for me right now with Mandarin Chinese, where I'm kind of a intermediate, I'd say middle intermediate, it's not the same method that is best for me in French, where I'm very advanced. Or if I start learning Persian tomorrow, then I'll need a different set of tools, a different method, because my needs are different at different times on my journey. So that's my message today. I hope that resonates with some of you. So again, I think extensive reading is fantastic. I think intensive reading is very powerful. I think, having a transcription and listening to a podcast where you understand 98% is great. But I also think struggling through a really difficult podcast that you can understand the general story, but definitely less than 98%, that's a great struggle. Shadowing is great. All these, flashcarding can be great. It also can be not great, depending on what you need and what you like. So let me know in the comments what you think. I really have been enjoying introducing so many different styles of learning to you and sharing what works for me. But like I said, I definitely want to hear your thoughts. With that, I will say cheers, have a fantastic Monday. Let's have a great new week. Definitely keep me posted on how your language learning is going, and I'll see you back here on Wednesday for another video.